The artist Lily Van Oost was a family friend. She was part of the reason that my family moved to Kerry in the 1980s. After leaving Belgium in the 70s, she moved here, to the remote Black Valley. She came from a line of 16th century Flemish master painters, and up until moving to Ireland, she painted and drew. But after a while, she began to use raw wool from her neighbours' farms and donated nylon from a local tights factory in her work. In the late 80s, to coincide with an exhibition, she made a jumper for the fountain statue of the river goddess Anna Livia in Dublin. But the city corporation wouldn't let her install it. Another giant knitted jumper of wool and nylon was made for a double-decker bus for a sculpture trail in the capital, but the bus company thought it might be dangerous. This time, a private tour bus owner came to the rescue. In 1991, she hung 9 woven faces from the famous Halfpenny Bridge as part of a Dublin City Commission. It was around this time that a young writer named Grace Wells came to ghostwrite Lily's autobiography, which was to be called The Liliad.
She was very enigmatic, and I was so drawn to her, I suppose, for lots of reasons. You know, she was fascinating, and what she was doing was so different. So I took all those notes, took her photos, started to write it all out by hand and type that up. And then, of course, I delivered it to Lily, and she didn't like it. So at that point, there was a big kind of rupture. I think it was over Christmas. And she wrote me a very stiff letter and told me this is how it's going to be. And I found this letter again recently. It's all there. But however, we navigated the rupture, and I went back and I became her typist. And that's what happened. And then I stayed on and stayed on and stayed on for months until we'd finished the job, really. This is a little cartoon sequence that Lily had created herself, and she was born in 1932, so I suppose she started to move toward the Second World War. And she had very, very strict, unkind parents who often locked her in the cellar. And I think that really loomed large in her. She had I think this darkness is very apt. There was a huge amount of darkness and trauma in Lily that associated with the childhood, and then she must have been about 12 during the war. All the many things she'd seen, she was still very, very upset by. She could remember one of her neighbours being tarred and feathered for having had an affair with a German officer. So all of that kind of came in together, I think, within her, all of those memories and this very harsh upbringing that she needed to break away from and ultimately did break away from. So here's a love of thunder. She had big emotions. She did love things. You know, she was very passionate about things. And there was a grandfather, and I don't know why this was significant to her, but I do remember her telling me those stories, like the grandfather collected horse dung for the roses and things. So certain things, I suppose that is how we remember things. Certain things stay in our mind. And then at a certain point, in the 1970s, early 1970s, she found the cottage in the Black Valley. And by that time, she was a very sensitive person. She couldn't really stand civilization, society, cities, noise anymore. So this very remote, very quiet, very rural place was really what she needed. She described herself as having visions, and she couldn't hear the visions or see the visions when she was in the city, so she needed to be in a place like the Black Valley to hear and channel her visions. And she had a huge, huge love of nature and great relationship with nature. So when she first came, there's nothing here in 1970. By 1990, she's created this incredible garden, and it really was like that. It was just all these colours, all these plants, and so much life.
From her little house in the Black Valley, Lily seemed to be constantly working on new strategies to use materials she had to hand to poke at Irish society and the political realities of the time. These images of Lily's work for an extensive exhibition with the Women's Artists Action Group, or WAG, show how Lily used textiles and all sorts of materials to talk about the taboo in 1980s Irish society. Is that a fetus? Is that menstrual blood? Undignified death? Horror? That was Lily, using wool and tights nylon to say things that didn't want to be heard at that time. When Lily was granted Irish citizenship in 1986, she presented a heavy woven wool piece named Brian Boru's Coat to the National Museum of Ireland. The body of the coat was woven in unprocessed wool. And the imperfections, including some marking fluid that farmers use to identify their sheep, are part of the overall artwork. When we finished filming the coat, it was put back in the box and returned to the archive. In a basement of Kerry County Library in Tralee, we discover little stacks of framed drawings. These drawings almost seem to be here waiting for their owner to collect them. In an office, we find 2 paintings she donated hanging on the walls. These were made shortly after her arrival in the Black Valley and seem to show a different side to Lily's artistic attitude. Urban, industrial even. Locally, she was well known and liked, and was sometimes considered a curiosity by the regional press. Here she is, celebrating the first telephone line in the valley in 1990. Sometime in the 90s, she made a large textile piece for her friends at Bowler's Garage in Killarney as a token of appreciation.
So Michael, this is the piece that we spoke about. Here it is in the flesh. I think artistically it's what they call textile piece. Just to give you a bit of background on it, that in the early to mid 90s, Liddy would have come into our garage and would have got her car serviced, and she would have spoken and got on well with the technicians and ourselves. And unsolicited, she just made this piece and brought it in one day. She didn't look for any money or anything, but it's quite elaborate. On the number plate, I don't know if you can see that down there, it's got the surname of the name of the garage, which is Bowler's. The driver of the car then is wearing a Kerry top. I think she had a Kerry flag on her car at one stage. But other than that, it kind of rises from green at the bottom to white in the background. I know it's faded from the emissions from cars, and the white will represent the sky. So when you came into reception of the garage, it was displayed prominently there, I'd say for maybe 20 years. And then when we had a facelift in the garage, and for corporate values, we couldn't have it. So it was moved into the canteen. So this would have been over the mechanics and whatnot in the canteen for about 10 years.
Very few of Lily Van Oost's diverse and provocative artworks can be found in one place, but traces are found everywhere when you start looking. Her house in the Black Valley is still there and is a little more accessible now. It even has a brand new 5G network. I remember visiting Lily's studio in Antwerp when I was a small child, and later spending time in her house in the Black Valley. It seems fitting that we're now making this recording in the house that she helped us find.